KCGM-TV, in association with the Nightscout Foundation, presents Are We There Yet? In T1 Tech. Tonight's guest is Ben West. As you may know, Ben has been a core Nightscout developer for the last 2 years. One of Ben's greatest achievements is programming the software that interfaces with the Medtronic pump, allowing for a closed loop. In addition to creating the closed loop, Ben has written over 90% of the OpenAPS software that is liberating people the world over, giving them back even more of what was taken from them at diagnosis. That being said, please welcome Ben West. Welcome. We have Ben West with us tonight, as you know. We've had a great run-through yesterday. It worked perfectly. Today, we lost a camera and some audio. So we're going to have to kind of bootstrap this. Hopefully you can hear. And Ben, you want to say something? We'll just get some sound checks so we don't start this program without the people that we're doing this for.
Howdy, this is Ben West with OpenAPS and Nightscout.
Does everybody hear us? I was really looking forward to not having to do this. Okay, so Ben, let's start out with some background on you as a person. Who is Ben West?
Well, I studied music in college, and then towards the end of college, I got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and I was quickly outfitted with insulin after a few months with syringe therapy. And originally, I didn't want to really do much with diabetes technology. I thought there's lots of other great, smart people in the world working on these things, and so it actually has not been a desire of mine always to be doing these things. It's been a very new adventure for me. So
now, Ben has been playing the piano. I guess one of the things to be a great programmer might be that you're musically inclined. Last week, we were sent off with John Kostick singing Bring Him Home. Tonight, Ben will be playing the piano over the credits. So we're looking forward to that. Now, Ben, we just had the FDA broadcast today with pretty mixed results. What's your honest assessment of that broadcast?
Well, what do you mean? It was a webinar that was kind of intended to help bridge a gap, I suppose, with the diabetes community as patients. So from that point of view, it's been great to see them start to develop some venues where some kind of conversation with patients can happen as stakeholders. So from that perspective, it was great to. I called in and I listened, and it was great to hear OpenAPS and Nightscout kind of get mentioned a few times. But I don't think it doesn't signal much of a change in policy from the things that they've said. But they did, I think, go into a little bit on what they're kind of looking for from an artificial pancreas system that someone brings to them. And so, they're looking for the system to be modular, for it to be testable. It kind of plays a big role there. And so all of the things are great to look at. We'll see if they translate to making a big difference with therapy, though, right? I think one of the things that we've discovered is that, as patients, because these devices are connected to us, and because our only other really alternative is to kind of suffer some of the symptoms of the disease, we have the options are to do something or do nothing, and a lot of us are choosing to do as much as we possibly can, I suppose.
So with the OpenAPS, it seems as of recent that there has been a groundswell, probably at the 50 patient mark. Now, where in the world is OpenAPS?
Where, you mean physically, where are those people located?
Just generally. We know that is Milos doing it? Solka is.
I think I don't keep track of the particular individuals. Dana has been doing a great job keeping track of who's been doing it. Certainly, we've seen a lot of the kind of the Nightscout developers. A lot of them have switched over. If you look at the Nightscout development currently, a lot of the features that are going in there are to help tie in to OpenAPS. And certainly part of the reason for that is because those people are wanting to use those features. So yeah, it's almost kind of like where Nightscout was when it started. Nightscout was kind of released by John and a few other individuals, and I think the thinking at the time was maybe we'd reach 100 people or something like that, right? And then thanks to the community that grew out of that and the willingness to support everyone, what we've seen instead of 100 people is several thousand people, and the numbers on that are even difficult to get an accurate picture of. So, but it's almost like that where it's hard to say who's going to be the next person to use OpenAPS. It might be someone with very little technical knowledge that actually requires a lot of help, and they're just lucky enough that someone was there to be able to help them. Or it might be the next teenager that sees this as a way to engage in therapy and not have to worry about it as much. And we're seeing all of those people come out. So it's really been something else. So.
Yes, we also, in our Nightscout Bulgaria group, they've actually changed the name to Nightscout and OpenAPS because they're part of this movement. And something about Bulgaria, they're always on the cutting edge. While we were all waiting for the G5 in the States, they were showing us pictures of the G5 in action. And so when I think of Bulgaria, I think of extremely leading edge group of folks who actually traveled. Dana met our admin in London when she was there. Now, the OpenAPS software uses a very vital piece of software that you wrote that allows for communication with the pump itself.
Yeah, there's so it kind of started back in 2006. In the previous several years, I had tried the Medtronic CGM and the Dexcom 7. Is it
7 Plus? Yeah, 7 and 7 Plus.
And my experience with both of them was not very good. The Dexcom 7, they gave me a trial unit for a week to borrow, and I lost it in a cab. So it wasn't attached. I mean, I had too many, at some point you've got, your meter and your keys and your phone, and, after 5 or 6 things, one of them tends to get lost. So it wasn't attached and it got lost. And I was really bummed because I didn't even get the, a big part of the theory for choosing a device like that is that it's collecting all of this data. And the theory for, personalized medicine, we're calling it now, right, is that the more data you've got about this, you can actually analyze that and then choose to make a different decision, right? So there's this notion that, all right, we'll collect more data and we'll create a feedback loop so that the lessons that we learn from the data, we can change our decision making. We can make better decisions. So that wasn't really happening because I lost the Dexcom device and then in the cab, and I didn't get the value of going to the clinic and having someone explain how all the data worked and what it might mean for therapy. It was just gone. And then I ended up buying the Medtronic because they're bundling their pump with the CGM. It turns out we can touch on that a bit later. That's been a really effective strategy for them. but I tried the Medtronic one, and it alarmed a lot, and the adhesive on the Medtronic made my skin really kind of inflamed, and it was not comfortable to wear. And then on top of all of that, the alarm driving me crazy and inaccurate. And I found in those early days with CGM, I was very reactive to the CGM. I was looking at the number and saying, I don't like this number, I want it to go away, and so I'm going to rage bolus. And then found myself, with insulin reactions after several times of essentially reacting inappropriately to this high number. There was already, I had given insulin, and it had been maybe an hour, so maybe not the full lifetime that the insulin needed to have its full effect, and so the number is still high, right? You haven't given it enough time to come down yet, and I think what we're seeing, hopefully, with tools like Nightscout, at the time I stopped using it, and I decided I'm not going to use these tools anymore until we have a way to get the data. Because that's kind of the whole promise of using the tool in the first place. It's not, a CGM isn't talking to your pump or anything like that. So it's not, you introduce it to people and they look at it and they say, oh, it's great that those things are working together for you, and you don't have to worry about it. And then you have to go through this, this routine of dispelling them of their preconceived notions about, no, I have to read the number from this device and then figure out how much I trust it and whether I want to artificially lie and essentially to the other device by increasing the number or decreasing the number, or just going off of my intuition essentially, and leaving the software support behind altogether. It seems like we should have maybe more options, right? Maybe why wouldn't we be able to express our opinions about how things should work in the software? That's how a lot of things get expressed these days, is through software. So, if a manufacturer can make a rule that says it should alarm under some condition, why would we not have access to the data that would allow us to change those decisions, right? So
that's one of the things that I didn't fully understand. And it wasn't until you were talking at D-Data, when you were posing a question to the CTO of Dexcom, and this was a whole paradigm shift for me, because this is where I realized being a caregiver of a CWD is far removed from being a PW, someone with diabetes T1. When you said, when you are using a device that is plugged into your body, there's a trustworthiness issue, and you have to ask, how much do I trust this device? Is it working appropriately? And how can I tell? How can I verify it is doing what I expect it to do without blindly trusting someone else's work, without trusting corporate America? When we can verify the vendor's claims through open data, that makes us trust and love that vendor even more. Open data is not always about new features and what we are going to do with it, because that's where I had been. That was the world I had been living in. Sometimes it's about how much can I trust this device on which my life depends. And when you said that, that was a huge awakening for me, because you have this device on you on which your life depends. And if it's open data, you can verify that it's functioning properly. It's like, I don't want to do a blanket statement in regards to corporate America because I like so much of it. But the Volkswagen beating emissions, if that was open data, that never would have happened. People would have gone, hey, wait a minute. And I looked at my wife and I said, they can't be the only ones. And then Mitsubishi comes out and says, we've been fudging our numbers. And then Suzuki comes out and says, well, we've been fudging our numbers, but our fudge fell within the governmental boundaries, so we don't have to do anything. So that was a funny example. Then last week, Chevrolet comes out and says, yeah, we've been doing it too. So with all this proprietary software and with all of this under a cloak, we are at the mercy of for-profit corporations telling us what is real. And so when you said that at D-Data, that was a huge shift in paradigm for myself. So you wrote this. How long did it take you to decipher the signals from the Medtronic pump?
Right. So that's the rub here, is that that's what preceded. That's what kind of set me off. And one of the things that's always kind of touched me is that, there's this quote by Thucydides that kind of goes, right. There's no right and wrong. Right and wrong is only a question between equals in power in the world, and the strong do what they will, and the weak suffer what they must. Right. So So we're in a weak position here as patients. We're in a very vulnerable position, and what are our ways to make something? What do we do about this situation? So that's what started me to look into, well, okay, we can do almost anything. And I started this project Insulat in late 2009 in December. And within 6 or 9 months or so, or about a year or so, realized, Insulat was in theory going to be everything that diabetes needed all in one place in one project. Right, and that was pretty naive. It turns out it was very naive, because soon after I found I was able to get protocols for several meters, but I could not get the protocol for Medtronic, and I had called Medtronic. I even called FDA, asking, I need access to this data, and I found, okay, this is a pretty serious question. It's an open question, and therefore, just the question of how do you talk to this one pump is essentially an entirely its own project. It's like there's enough material there that one person could spend a very long time just working on that without working on all of the apps that would use that, right? So without working on artificial pancreas, has got to talk to an AP. Artificial pancreas has to talk to a pump. Anything you want to do with visualization, it has to talk to the pump to get the data. Right, so almost anything that you would want to do, you've got to be able to get the data. And then for a lot of those apps, you've actually got to be able to send commands back out to the pump to maybe manipulate situations in favorable ways. So I started that in 2009 in December. By 2011 or so, it graduated to a project for each device. So each device has its own project. So there's Decoding CareLink, which is the project that has really taken off and matured. And there's some others that haven't been quite as successful. So there's a decoding Omnipod, there's a decoding Dexcom, there's a decoding, you name the vendor, there's a decoding that vendor out there that's focused on just how do we get the data for this particular device. And that actually took quite a bit of time. It took a long time to understand the basic frames. So basically when you have a conversation to talk to these devices, the messages are sent back and forth in these tiny little frames, and you have to know exactly how those frames are put together in order to understand them and in order to send new ones. And that actually took quite a bit of time. And then once we had that, we started looking at. I was just interested in getting the data, so we were looking at how do we get data from this thing, analyze the data coming back, and figure out what it means. So I would get pages of history directly from the device, a raw memory dump, basically, and then I would do a very simple action, like rewind the pump. I would rewind the pump, and then I would rewind the pump again. And then I'd rewind the pump again. And I would do that, 5 or maybe 10 or maybe 15 times in a row, just to see, and then keep taking the raw memory from the pump and seeing what changed this time. What new popped up in the memory since last time. And so literally when you do this, the new records just pop right out. And so if you do the same action 5 or 6 times, let's say bolus, all right, let's give a bolus. And obviously for this you want to be disconnected, right? So but you can give a bolus for 0.1, right? All right, great. Now let's bolus for 0.2. All right, great. Now let's bolus for 0.3. Great. And so that you can literally watch each one come out in the raw memory and compare them with the last one. And hopefully what you hope to see is that the second time you did it, when it was 0.2 instead of 0.1, hopefully there's some number somewhere in there that you can watch is just incrementing by the amount that would correspond somehow with what you did. So I did this thousands and thousands and thousands of times over the course of the last 6 years, basically.
I'm gonna embarrass Ben right now. I've talked to a few venture capitalists in our conferences and whatnot, and one venture capitalist last year said to me, think about that. Think about what Ben did in order to interface with a Medtronic pump. He said, if Ben was functioning at 60% on any given day, it would be 110% for the rest of us. So that was one of the hugest compliments that I had heard in regards to the work you had done. And one of the things that Ben and I had talked about previously was the MIT lab scenario. And it sounds like that is actually how that took place. It's where, there's a goal, but there's no real timeline, because the breakthrough happens like with Edison when it happens. He knows 10,000 ways to not make the light bulb. And so
it's literally just running. I mean, there's a way to make it work. It's designed by people. So the same way that you look at music and you can practice it by going slower or going faster or isolating part of it. The same thing is true here. You can take a section of it and just watch what the bolus, watch what happens when we prime it 15 times in a row, right? And you're going to get it wrong 1,000 times, but it's the process that matters.
So in the industry, let's say there's a for-profit company in the industry, just generically, and they put a team together of the brightest minds, and they say, okay, this is our goal, and it happens to be the same goal you're working on, and they say, we have X amount of time to accomplish this and go. So they get to the end of it, and maybe it was only 3 years, but the breakthrough was 6 years away. So then they close up that department. It's a failure. It didn't work. We tried that. Whereas in the MIT lab environment, it goes on, and all of the benefits of the group. It reminds me of Palo Alto, Xerox in the late 60s, early 70s, where Xerox had these brilliant people, and they didn't really understand what it was. The chairman, the board of directors, it wasn't a copier. They did not understand it. So they didn't value it. Well, when that was disbanded, the people that were working there, one went off and continued on with Ethernet, and then that got bought out by 3Com. Another, the laser printer, there was the GUI. There were so many massive breakthroughs in there that you wouldn't have been able to get if they had gone in and said, okay, we've got 18 months, let's change the world. And then at the end of the 18 months, they would say, oh, this is the world changed. But it's kind of stifling the creative portion of what programmers do.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. So at that point, I began focusing pretty heavily the last 6 years or so on just perfecting just that. Just give up on everything else, because there's lots of people that can help make an app, but no one knows how to talk to the pump, right? So if you can manage to talk to the pump, that's you've unlocked, so many potential applications that you don't necessarily have to do yourself. You can team up with other people to do those things. So 2 years ago when Nightscout first popped up, I actually posted a video using DecoCare, and it was good enough to issue temporary basal rates to the Medtronic pump, as well as decode most of the history events from the pump. So in other words, it was good enough to essentially create an artificial pancreas out of, right? It's good enough that you can read the history, analyze everything that's going on, all the insulin that's been used, and then you actually change the instructions of the pumps to say you are normally scheduled for these basal rates, but for the next 30 minutes, go ahead and use this special temporary basal rate instead. So I posted a video of that right as Nightscout was being born, and because I had spent some time thinking about this, when Nightscout was born in that April 2 years ago, I recognized what was happening. I said, oh wow, this is an application that's using the glucose data, which I don't have, right? So this is perfect. I've got the insulin pump data, and these people over here have the glucose data. I bet we could do some really cool things if we all had a forum where we could work together. And so at that point, I created the Nightscout GitHub organizations and helped foster Nightscout software for the past, for about a year after that.
One of the downsides to being a very prolific programmer is you don't have time to go out to conferences a lot. You don't have time to do an extreme amount of social media. You don't have a lot of time to be very visible. You're pretty much absent from a lot of the flow of what goes on. And so on April 28th, when Jason Calabrese and Ben West hit the ground already in progress on this, because they had been working on it much before, there wasn't a lot of understanding in the outer circle of the group, or in the extended group, or in the community itself, of who was putting all of this time in. And it was one of the most strange things, because there was so much recognition going on, and there wasn't a lot of recognition for the programmers. Not that you were looking for recognition, but it was almost like there was a magical quality to how this all happened. But in real life, John slaved away at the computer. Lane, Ross, Kevin, Jason, and yourself slaved away for hours and hours, late nights, weekends, around the clock, and especially you, Ben, because you've been doing this pro bono for a couple of years. So it's one of those things that the irony to me, where it ends up being something completely different, is if someone in the community was to say, here's $140,000 for the Nightscout project, people would build the tallest statue in the Pantheon for that person. But, the person who truly believes in what he is doing for the better good of everyone, who truly believes in the idea that there's people in need. And as you can tell, this information is coming from my heart, not my brain. So you get this contrast where it's lost on the greater community to a large extent, but for our children, it's not lost. And there's so many in the community that know you that it's not lost. I've had the opportunity to speak with Ben a few times in San Francisco at a wonderful neighborhood bistro, where I will have a significant difference of opinion on a position that Ben has taken. And I'll try to, I'll go through all the normal world things that we do in business to solve the difference of opinion. And it may not be rectified for myself. So I'll go out and I'll talk to Ben, and we'll spend the first 2 hours delving into the great theory ideology of this. And then about the third hour, it's probably when dessert comes at the bistro, there's this huge breakthrough, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, and I don't want to say it's like, trivialize it as something as the Spock mind meld, but it's truly at that third hour on multiple occasions, it clicks, and I'm able to see it, and I'll be driving home, and I'll be thinking, wow, I had to go through a lot. So when I hear about what you're doing, for me, it goes so far beyond just the programming. It goes into the person, and I only know just such a small amount, but it goes into the person behind the programming. So let's switch gears to OpenAPS. What are you looking for, and what's next for OpenAPS?
Well, you got me a little flustered there. Thank you for that. It's very kind. What's next for OpenAPS? Well, we've got a lot of sister projects. I think there's a couple of different ways to look at it. I tried to put a lot of design thinking, I think that's what we're calling it these days, into how do we build these communities and what do we need to make progress. So for Nightscout, when Nightscout popped up, we needed the community to exist. So it was purely about how are we gonna make a big tent that everyone can play a role in. And I think we've done a good job there, creating this community that didn't exist before. And we're literally seeing the regulations being changed as a result, as a direct result. We're seeing vendors pivot in the stories that they're telling and in some of the moves that they're making. So I think one way to look at this is advocacy-wise, right? A year ago, no one was asking for OpenAPS. You know what I mean? No one was asking for OpenAPS. Now we've got people saying, I literally just helped someone over the past 4 or 5 days, I think, spending multiple hours per day, what is it that you need to do this? And, so we got it up and working. So advocacy-wise, I think there's something about this whole process that's very interesting in terms of who gets to be stakeholders in designing these systems and creating these systems and saying that system is okay. Who gets a voice in expressing whether or not the system is okay. And I think we've raised some really interesting and important questions for the entire industry to consider. So advocacy-wise, I would love to see people continue to continue to build on those things, because if we can get access to the data, we can do all kinds of interesting things. Another way to look at it might be, feature-wise, there's a lot of very interesting things. So it'd be lovely to have, interoperability-wise, it'd be nice to have more pumps. So it'd be nice to have Insulet, Roche,
absolutely.
Just go through all of them. I don't see a reason why this system would not work with every single pump out there. That's a design goal.
Right. Now, I agree with that, but as a businessman, I look at that and I say, if I have in my lab a project going to accomplish our own version of that, what would be my motivation to open up to what they would perceive as a competitor, but what we would perceive as an extension of what they do? I mean, the first pump company to give you folks access is the favorite pump company of everyone, because we would all be going to it. I mean, at first my wife was, we're not going back to Medtronic. But then when she saw the success, well, he was 18 months old when he had it too, so he's a much larger mass for all of that. But she has seen everything that has happened. And Jason Calabrese said something to me that made me really think. He said, if you have the capability, and this won't apply to everybody, but he says, if you have the capability, if you have the ability, and if you have everything that you need to improve your child's life, but you withheld it, could that be considered a form of child abuse? And I thought to myself, wow, that was a really powerful statement, but if I have the ability to improve my child's life and I don't, we get right back to the beginning with Lane Desborough, and we are not waiting. We know how to do it. We're going to do it. We're not waiting, because these lives matter. There's value for these little ones to have it improved. It's like Chris Hanneman saying at D-Data in November, see this line where it was, 80 or 100 straight overnight? He said, I woke up feeling good. I woke up feeling good. Now, who in the heck doesn't want that?
It is pretty addictive.
Yeah.
Well, to answer your question there, I think again, if we look at what is the FDA saying, what are the FDA guidelines for this kind of device, right?
Right.
What are they saying that they're looking for? And that's exactly what they're saying that they're looking for. So why would someone not want to present that to them, right? Why would you want to present something else, right? It seems to me that what they're calling for is a modular system that can be tested and because it can be tested by multiple people. I mean, that's part of the FDA's workflow. That's part of the process that the FDA has designed. If you look at their reasons that the FDA designed the regulations the way that they have, one of the justifications that they use in creating and demanding all of the documentation and the quality systems and everything else that goes into it is that they assume that an independent third party, or the patient would be able to purchase the specs to audit the quality system on their own and verify that the device is working on their own. And it's because the FDA doesn't run the tests, right? The FDA doesn't have any capacity to invent things. They don't have much capacity to run tests. So what they're looking to do is ensure that everyone has a very good tool to get at quality of the device because of the process that it underwent, right? So they're byproducts. And it's because of the process. It's not because of any singular component, right? Disable this one component and it's not safe anymore. That's not the kind of system we want, right? You disable this component, it's still safe. That's the kind of system we want. And so I think part of what we need to do there is evaluate what are the different stakeholders. So the business has certain stakeholders, and they have certain responsibilities to the customers and to their patients. And I think one of those needs to acknowledge that because the device is connected to this person, they really do have a basic need to understand how to talk to the device from a technical perspective. And not everyone, very much other professionals, but that doesn't mean that the hood should be welded shut, right? There's still an easy to use latch underneath that I have access to, and the reason is because I need access to it.
Great correlation, Ben.
And I think we're looking at the same thing with a lot of these technologies. The process that we were using when we set up this process assumed that patients would be able to do these things. And you look at the intended, so are we doing off-label somehow? Well, what is the intended use of the device? The intended use of the insulin pump is to be a machine that gives insulin over time. So, I want to make the most of that intended use. I don't see much conflict. And as you said, I think what we've seen some with Dexcom is when we made a splash, I think with remote monitoring, we saw people say, "Oh, well, what do I need to do to get that?" Right? I'll buy more Dexcom as a result. And I think we saw that play out in a really interesting.
Yeah, in the Nightscout study, Joyce, was it 20%?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
So those are real dollars. It can seem to businesses in the industry that, well, that's not a big enough portion. But if you took everyone who's purchasing, and the power is in the people. The power is in the people. We want to work with you. Please work with us, because we need to move forward. Don't be the obstacle. We don't want to have 4,000, 15,000 people calling your office to ask you just to play nice with us. I'm kind of split. I'm split on the FDA. I went from 100% not really seeing the value to, after one of the long, in-depth conversations we had, that actually I give them the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes I struggle with them being the FDA. That's the good part, benefit of the doubt I give them. And then there's the other half of me that rearranges those letters to DAF instead of FDA. They're the DAF. Why are you so daft? So I hope.
To be fair to them, though, I'll be a little bit of an FDA apologist, I suppose, right? I think their job is not to invent things for the American public. Their job is to oversee them, and it may be obvious to everyone, right, what should happen next. We need the CGM and the pump to be interoperating with each other, and we want that to be applicable across vendors, right? So that's obvious to everyone. It's going to look different for every vendor. Different vendors are going to continue bundling, their CGM product with their pump product, and it's not going to be interoperable with other devices. And that's not the design that the FDA is calling for. And so it's not surprising that these people, that these firms are delaying, bringing stuff to the FDA when it's not what the FDA kind of laid out, right?
Right.
So, but that doesn't mean that we can't. I mean, the FDA relies on the public to bring them things to discuss and review, and we could be doing that as well. That is a role that we can play. We don't have to wait to buy things. We can actually send in our own projects to the FDA, and they would be happy to discuss them.
Joyce Lee just typed in, she says it's 30%.
Oh, wow.
So that's a significant amount of money from where we come from as a community. Anyways, we have a few minutes left before we open up to questions. Is there anything else that you want to say in regards to OpenAPS? I know we're looking forward to continuing the process and getting that set up.
Give it a shot. I think it's it's based on text tools, so it's a bit of a throwback technology-wise. It doesn't use fancy screens or fancy GUIs. There's no pictures. It's all text. And the reason I did that is actually because it's really easy to debug over a remote chat connection. So it's very easy to share what's going on, and both people. It's very easy to debug and teach. I find, and it's also easy to build other fancier tools on that make it even easier. So we're looking at. We mentioned very briefly. Some of the features we're looking at are things like Bluetooth Low Energy integration. So being able to, we've got sister projects that are working on various mobile apps, and some of those are very experimental in the sense that they actually run the heart of the artificial pancreas brain on the smartphone, and I think some people find that desirable. I like having a dedicated device that's kind of in charge of everything. So I think we're going to see some more options pop up.
Nice.
The way to get started, there's going to be different ways to get started, and then hopefully we'll even see interoperability, because the open source community generally likes working together. I expect we'll see some mobile apps where you can actually configure and control OpenAPS from your phone as well. So all those things are kind of speculative, future-looking, very hard to commit to any dates, but those are definitely all the kinds of things that we're looking at to increase access, make things easier, reduce burden, etc.
So now, for people that just want more information, they can go to openaps.org, and from there it will direct them. You folks have active support in the Gitter, through Gitter?
Yes. Yeah, so openaps.org, I think there's a link to the docs from there. There's also openaps.rtfd.org, which is short for OpenAPS read the docs.
That is actually the buy-in level. The buy-in level is you have to successfully use Gitter, and you need to read the instructions. If you're not prepared for that at this point, that's okay. But there will come a time where things come together where you can, give it a go again.
Yeah, I think, again, process-wise, it's great that other vendors are going to maybe ship in 2017, maybe 2018 with devices that do these things. When they do, I think what we'll find is that we'll have learned some lessons in that year and have moved on to a whole new suite of features.
Yeah.
And features that can be tuned or personalized better to even more tightly control the glucose. So I think, that's also kind of speculative too, but that's just the pattern that we've kind of seen, is that we're able to try 1,000 times in ways that they would not be willing to try.
Correct. Well, and a good example of that, not only in what you are doing and the OpenAPS programmers are doing, but the time that John's putting into the Android version. Medtronic and Dexcom are like, this doesn't make business sense at this juncture for us to try 238 different versions of how this BLE connection can stay connected. But that's what they're doing in the testing group, and with great success. So the community is actually such a wonderful part of this. And if you're not ready to set up OpenAPS, you can advocate for open data. You can advocate to the pump companies, because people always think when the industry, okay, we're only doing this because it didn't exist. And so we want you to release all of the different, I want 15 artificial pancreases on the market. But that will actually create an explosion of innovation. Because it's similar to in Nightscout, where people will say, well, Cher has the number and graph. What's the difference? And if you go to nightscout.info and you look at Amy Cohen's graphic on what the differences are, it's, we have a near virtual artificial pancreas at the tail end of the Nightscout possibilities. So there's a huge amount that you can choose from. I'm always saying I want everything at the tech buffet for T1D. I do. I want it because of just the daily struggle it is to maintain quality of life for our children, and then you're doing this to maintain the quality of life for others and yourself as someone who lives this scenario. So, well, Ben, thank you so much for being with us tonight, and we'd like to start by taking any questions from the group. And Lynn says, why do I feel like Ben is looking at me about reading the documentation? That's just not you, Lynn. That's a universal thing. Everybody comes into the community sleep deprived, stressed, a billion things to do, and sitting down and clearing out space to read instructions is a monumental effort. I will have to say that. So we'll see if we have any comments coming in or questions coming in for Ben.
Sometimes, I often do step in and help people, and the reason I do that is to walk through the documentation, walk through the tools, get the empathy with people that don't have the same experience that I do, right? Because that experience then goes right back into the tools, right? So over the past 4 days, when I've been helping people on Gitter, it's not just about being patient, or it's actually, that is actually the process I'm using to get the feedback. And during that time, over the last few days, there's been a dozen releases to OpenAPS and the the projects. So
speaking of that, we have Chris Hanneman coming in. Hey Ben, long-time listener, first-time caller. What do you think are the biggest strengths and biggest weaknesses of the OpenAPS tool set at the moment?
One of the weaknesses, I think, is the oddness, right? I think most people raise your hand if you've heard of SSH, right, and feel comfortable using SSH. That's another text tool, and it's one of the tools that we use to get into the device, to talk to the device, to set it up, and everything else. So I think there's an interesting. That's actually, I think, it's the flip side of the same coin. It's both the worst part and the best part. There's 30 years of use behind a lot of these tools,
right?
And so the chance that maybe you haven't heard of SSH is pretty good, perhaps.
Correct.
But if you go to an engineering friend, the chance that they've heard of SSH, very, very high. They're going to know and be familiar with that tool. And a lot of the tools, a lot of the OpenAPS tool set is built up that way from the ground up, from very, very simple tools that all engineers are familiar with. And there's a lot of experience behind those tools. And so rather than shoot for, I think James Wedding put an interesting post today about agile development, right? Rather than shoot for like a Commodore jet plane, right?
Correct.
It's like, here's a skateboard. A skateboard's very simple to build. It's very simple to teach how to use. You go stand on it, right? And it's very easy to fall off, but we can use the design experience to make a bike the next time and put a handle on it, and we'll get to the car.
Right. That is a concept that has to be understood at higher levels in the industry.
But we've got to understand the experience of why did the person want the car. Was the car the right tool in the first place, and what should the experience be like while driving the car, and not so much what does the car look like.
Right.
And I think we get easily distracted by those kinds of issues.
We have another question from Lori Phillips. She says, what are the legal issues with having a DIY AP? I am responsible for my child's welfare, and I agree with Jason that it's irresponsible to not use a technology that we have, but worry about legality of it all. FDA touched on that today, but was vague. They're vague on purpose, Lori. One of the things that, for example, when X-Strip first came out, the Wixel, where people were building those and replacing their receivers, that was considered heresy on many levels. It was hugely... it was like someone had said, you need to sever a limb. It was just, we actually had some very wonderful people leave the group in the community because of that. They felt that was crossing the boundary. Whereas people who use it and have used it, it's taking off like wildfire in Canada and Europe because they have no alternatives. And it's been wildly successful. So
we can actually use that as an example. I had a conversation with FDA, and the X-Strip made it into the conversation. They said, Nightscout is okay. It's secondary display. The risk is very low. But if you look at X-Strip, you're doing a new algorithm on the readings. The algorithm hasn't been studied. We don't really quite understand the performance characteristics. Why do you need a new algorithm, right? And I kind of shot back and said, we don't really want or need a new algorithm. We'll use the safest algorithm available. What we needed is access to the data, right? We needed a smaller device. We needed a device that didn't alarm. These people didn't have access to the device, so we needed a cheaper device. So those are the questions we were looking at, not it wasn't just gee whiz, we kind of want to tinker with a new algorithm. So the legal questions are around distribution and not around usage, right? So everyone understands you've got a disease, you're going to do everything in your power to prevent the disease or to take life back from the disease, right?
Correct.
But if you're responsible for distributing, that starts to look like business contracts, it starts to look like commerce, and therefore the FDA has power to say, why are you distributing medical therapy?
Right. And as always, and as the beginning of every podcast you ever hear with type 1 diabetes, we offer no medical advice. We also offer no legal advice. Please consult your physician and legal attorney for further information. Not that they're going to be that much more helpful. But let's see what we have here. Renee says, I desperately want this for my child, but it sounds so far above my pay grade. Where would I even start? First of all, Renee, that's okay. That's okay. Desperately wanting this for your child, that's just absolutely normal. You're a warrior mother. You want the best for your child. Where would you even start? It would just be at openaps.org, reading the directions. It probably took 9 months for my wife to go from the idea of this to actually wanting this, just because there were so many obstacles, and we're going to be moving through it very slowly, but methodically. So basically, if you can get through the instructions, and there are people there to help, but don't put yourself in a situation where you're stressing over having to create your own personal artificial pancreas, because that could, in and of itself, could be counterproductive to your well-being and peace of mind. Is that a fair statement, Ben?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Especially, don't kick yourself, for trying to learn and feeling like you're not getting anywhere. I mean, there are some tools, but the reason I chose these tools is because they are actually fairly easy to learn. And we've even got some extra tools that we're integrating into the documentation to really make it a whole lot easier. So there's not a whole lot of fanciness. It's really just about mostly just following some of the instructions.
We have a question coming in from Gustavo, and he says, I would love the community work, Nightscout OpenAPS, to make investments in medical companies move from incremental feature release devices to innovation that none of us patients could be doing on our own, i.e. a cure. Have you seen any signs of this happening in the industry?
Any signs of can you read it again?
I would love the community work, Nightscout and OpenAPS, to make investments in medical companies move from incremental feature release devices to innovation that none of us patients could be doing on our own. Have you seen any signs of this happening in the industry? I guess moving
Yeah. Well, so I have had a bunch of conversations with several of the vendors. So I have a running suite of conversations going with Medtronic about securing access to compatible pumps that we can use. And other than that, we know that, for example, if you call into Medtronic support and you start talking about OpenAPS, they've heard of OpenAPS, right? And I think that's actually what we want is when the next time, keep calling Medtronic, keep calling Insulet, keep calling Tandem. We've got some conversations going with them, but if you don't like the answers that, we've been getting from them, it's important for us to keep calling, get a ticket filed with these firms, so that the next time that someone calls up, they say, "Oh, you wanted OpenAPS? Sure, we already got, been on the line. We gave them the protocol last month. it'll be done next month. That would be great. To date, no vendor is yet ready to do that quite yet. A lot of them are really scared about liabilities. There's a feeling among the vendors that this is opening a new a new surface area, right, where the risk exposure for them is changing, and they're not really comfortable with that. So we just need to keep having that conversation, keep calling them up and saying, hey, we need access to the data. And what would be really cool, I think, to help us get there even faster is, Bennett Dunlap has done a great job kind of putting together these templates that are usable, that you can get this template and it tells us how we should get in touch with a legislator or a regulator and give feedback to them. And I think we could do a similar effort perhaps with these vendors to say, oh yeah, I'm interested in Nightscout and OpenAPS integration for Insulet. What do I tell the first tier support to get through and get this ticket filed, and so we can make progress? I think that would be a pretty interesting way for a lot more people to get involved.
All righty. Well, that's great. Well, we're going to have to end it at this point. Ben, are you going to play us out over the credits?
Yeah, sure. Just a few seconds, sure.
Anyways, we would like to thank our guest, Ben West, for speaking with us tonight and for being one of the best examples of paying it forward. This has been a Nightscout Foundation production. Come change the world with us. Learn more at nightscoutfoundation.org. In association with the Coexist movement, let your voice be heard while you still have a choice. And of course, in association with CGM in the Cloud, open source, open data, open hearts, caring for you and your loved ones around the world and around the clock. We now return you to your regularly scheduled life, already in progress. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll see you next week.